Okay, welcome. Welcome to today's first installment of the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance's oral history, our journey to home ownership. My name is Tommy Worley, and I'm one of the real estate instructors with Coldwell Banker Realty that's located in the Connecticut Westchester region. And I also happen to be a real estate broker associate for the last 28 years or so. But most importantly, I'm proud to be one of the co-chairs of Realogy's Real Pride Committee, our LGBTQ plus employee relations group. Now, I have heard rumors that there is another organization that refers to itself as Real Pride. I want you to know they aren't the original Real Pride. We are the Real Pride, okay? Now, I'm speaking to you all today as a representative from Realogy, and that's not only an honor, it's a real privilege. And it is so appropriate since Realogy, which includes all our brands, Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, Century 21, Coldwell Banker Realty, Coldwell Banker Commercial, Corcoran Group, ERA, Climb, and Sotheby's International Realty are all sponsoring today's first event in the Alliance's oral history series. We are so proud of our years of leading the real estate industry and recognizing and advancing the lives of the LGBTQ community, employees and clients, and we welcome those looking for a career in all facets within our company and throughout all its brands. And it is so appropriate that we meet today because guess what? The Equality Act is back. So if you haven't heard, the House is voting on this bill shortly. So there's still time for y'all to reach out to your representative today. Now, you all may not know this, that Realogy was the first in the real estate industry to publicly support the Equality Act with HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign several years ago. We realize there's a lot of work ahead of us to get it through the Senate, and we will put all of our weight behind it once again, because it is the right thing to do. However, today is about Alliance's oral history series. And we're starting this amazing look at an area of New York City, and it's called the iconic Greenwich Village, how it emerged as a haven for the LGBTQ community. This section of Manhattan rose in importance on the night of June 28, 1969. That's the night the patrons of Stonewall had enough of police interference, raids, and they revolted. This was the start of the modern day LGBTQ plus movement, and the reason why we all celebrate Pride each month in June. We're looking forward to learning from our guest, Michael Levine. Now, Michael has lived in the Greenwich Village for more than 50 years. I believe he moved there when he was about 5 and has so much to share about this incredible neighborhood, the Stonewall uprising, and how it changed Manhattan and everywhere. He is a member of the Greenwich Village Historical Society and a frequent speaker about the area, about Stonewall, and the LGBTQ plus movement that began there. So in a moment, you're going to hear from Michael. But before that, I have one last thing to say, and I say this on behalf of all of Realogy, and that is we salute the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance for everything that you're doing to advocate on behalf of our community and our industry. We are so proud to be your partner. So now I'm going to turn this over to David. So David, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tommy. And what a treat it is to get the opportunity to speak with Michael. And Michael, let's go all the way back to before you even ended up in Greenwich Village. You grew up in Long Island and you went to Brooklyn College. So what was your upbringing?
Let me correct that a little bit. The facts are somewhat correct, but not entirely correct.
Oh, that's my life story.
That's okay. But let me first start up by just saying how pleased and honored I am to have been asked to be the first in your series of oral histories. It's quite an honor to participate in this webinar today, and I'm delighted to be here. So let's go back a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and correct some things as we go along the way. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights,
In
in
Brooklyn,
the old
okay.
Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. And I was born and raised in Crown Heights, where I lived until I moved to Greenwich Village in 1967. Right now, I'm almost 78 years old, so there's a lot of history, but I was a product of the old Brooklyn Jewish neighborhood, Crown Heights in Brooklyn, not Long Island. And at the time of my moving from Brooklyn to Greenwich Village, I was attending Hunter College in Midtown Manhattan, where I pursued a undergraduate degree in political science and a graduate degree in urban planning. So I now hold a master's degree in urban planning earned from Hunter College. My
Now
decision.
you weren't out at that point in Brooklyn or even college back then, right?
I was not out at all. There were people who knew. And when I eventually did come out after Stonewall, a lot of people said we knew all along. But it was the kind of thing you didn't talk about then. You didn't discuss it with family. You didn't discuss it with friends. Even if you had a friend who you thought was quote unquote homosexual, you were very, very coy and very, very distant about warming up to each other and saying, hey, I'm that way too. I really was out to no one at that time, living at home, living with family, going to Hunter College, and working part-time, working my way through college. I really kept it, excuse me, quite a secret. Dry throat, quite a secret. And I really thought again that nobody knew. But when I did come out after Stonewall, a lot of people were aware of it. And they said, we're so glad we finally know. And it is known and accepted by everyone.
When did you first learn about Greenwich Village? You call it a bohemian community that was, it attracted back then it would have been the gay and lesbian people. When did that occur to you that you could go there?
When I was old enough to travel from Brooklyn into, we called it the city. Friends of mine who grew up in the Bronx said they would call Manhattan downtown. But for those of us who grew up in Brooklyn, we were going to the city. And we were teenagers then, some other friends from the neighborhood. When we were old enough to travel on our own by the train to Manhattan, we kind of always ended up in Greenwich Village because we heard about the reputation of it being a bohemian location, a place of coffee shops and poetry readings and people sitting around all night and drinking soft drinks and getting stoned, and what a wonderful bohemian atmosphere it was. And when we went to these locations, I also knew in the back of my mind that something else goes on in this bohemian village that my other friends are not talking about, and this is where the gay people are. So it was enormously pleasurable for me to go to Greenwich Village with my friends when we were still teenagers, 13, 14, 15 years old, to walk around Greenwich Village, to go to the coffee shops on McDougal Street, on Bleecker Street, to watch the folks sitting and playing chess. We used to order a chessboard also. It was so in fashion to sit there all night long and play chess. But as we walked the streets of Greenwich Village, I knew this place is full of gay people. And from the corner of my eye, I saw where they were going. They were going into certain locations, certain bars, certain clubs that we were not going into. The first time it really, really occurred to me that I have to try and figure out where these places are, because I have a feeling this is where I should be and this is where I should be going. And that happened in 1967 when I was in my last year of college. I had saved enough money to move to Greenwich Village to an apartment for 1 year and to be able to explore Greenwich Village on my own without being with my friends. And I would walk around the streets of Greenwich Village, and I would find the gay boys walking around, particularly around Sheridan Square and the little park that people gathered in that is now a national monument right across the street from the Stonewall. I moved in 1967 from Brooklyn, well, again, 1 year of college left, to a studio apartment that I rented for $130. Talk about a
Let's say that again. How much?
$130 in 1967 for a studio apartment.
In Manhattan.
in Greenwich Village, affordable. And I found it after just one day of searching through the ads in the Village Voice. You will recall that History of the Village Voice would be sold on Thursday night, and it would be completely gone from the newsstands, everyone looking for apartments. I saw several studio apartments available. I grabbed it, and I took one on 9th Street right here in the Village, moved in 1967, $130 a month rent. And the first thing I did on the day that I moved to Greenwich Village, with help from my family, I didn't have that much furniture to move from my room in Brooklyn. We moved into the studio apartment on East 9th Street. My brother and family went home. And the first thing I did that night was do what had been in the back of my mind all those years. I walked down Christopher Street in front of Christopher Park, and I waited. And I watched all the gay boys going into the Stonewall. And I knew that you kind of had to know someone to get in. Everyone was saying hello to everyone. I felt if I try to get in on my own, it may not work. They may not let me in. So I watched a crowd of young gay men walking in, and I just walked in with them. I kind of fit into the crowd, walked right in, and within 2 minutes, I was inside of the Stonewall. It was like a dream come true, a life fantasy. Finally, the reality had happened. I was no longer observing it from the outside. I was now inside. And what an experience that was.
Was that the first time you really fully comprehended that you were gay?
That is correct. Up to that point, I'd had a few liaisons with some guys that I knew from school. Nothing very serious, nothing very lasting. But the second I walked into the Stonewall and saw young men dancing with young men, young women dancing with young women, hugging, kissing, holding hands, an occasional drag queen, and even the straight folk who were there because the Stonewall was a place we went to have fun. Everyone was welcome. You were white, you were black, you were Hispanic. There was no color in the Stonewall. There was no sexual identity. If you were comfortable there, you were welcome. And as I saw everyone dancing with everyone, loud music blaring, cigarette smoke in my eyes, the smell of beer everywhere, I said, this is where I belong. This is me. I am one of these folk. I'm home.
And when you moved into Greenwich Village, did you have a roommate?
No, I was alone. Again, I just took a studio apartment. I knew how much I could afford. My original budget was $100, but I went up to $130 because I loved the studio apartment that I saw. And I took the apartment on my own. I really didn't want a roommate at that point because I had been living with family for so long. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to explore Greenwich Village, and I wanted to explore my sexuality, and did not want a roommate. And I knew that I could afford the $130 a month rent in 1967 on my own without having a roommate. So I lived alone in a very affordable rental apartment.
At that kind of prices, did Greenwich Village also attract all different diverse groups of people that weren't just back then? I guess there was no such thing as trans, you said, so it was mostly gay and lesbian, right?
Well, it was mostly gay and lesbian. There were drag queens that we saw at the Stonewall, and the drag queens were in so many ways responsible for our gay liberation today. They're the ones who started the rebellion in the street. The drag queens are the ones who said after we were pushed out of the Stonewall, we're not going to take this anymore. We're staying here. We're going to dance in the streets until you let us back in again. We did see them there, didn't see very much on the streets. As you walk down Christopher Street toward the waterfront, you would occasionally see a trans. Some of them were hookers. We knew that. It was accepted. They were part of the community. Everyone was part of the community. There were gay men. There were straight men, gay women, straight women. There were cross-dressers. There were drag queens. There was everything in Greenwich Village. There were also people of quite wealth. Fifth Avenue always had very expensive apartment buildings, almost all of which are now cooperative. And there were some beautiful townhouses lining all of the side streets from 9th Street to 13th Street, running from 2nd Avenue all the way to Hudson Street. Very expensive townhouses that are single occupant owned. So there was always a great mix of sexual identities, single people, gay men and lesbians, and of course, families with children. You would see two men walking down the street holding hands, and right next to them, you would see parents walking children in a stroller. Everything went. You could never see that in any other street that I was aware of at that time, other than in Greenwich Village. In no other location in the city could two men have walked down the street holding hands. I would occasionally see a woman walking down the street, looking at another woman and smiling and saying, "Oh my God, I thought only gay men do that. Gay women cruise also?" And this was right around the corner from me at 9th Street and 6th Avenue. I said, "Oh my God, only in Greenwich Village can this happen. Only in Greenwich Village is this accepted. If anyone did any of this behavior in Crown Heights, you wouldn't make it more than a day or two in that neighborhood before you really, really were beaten up in the streets." Greenwich Village was not just a bohemia to me. I was aware of what kind of a neighborhood it was, a welcoming neighborhood where it's not that anything goes, it's where everything is accepted. And even before I moved to Greenwich Village, I was aware of the kind of freedom that I would have the day I was here. And boy, was that ever true. That was why it was so important for me to do the move 1 year before I finished college. I couldn't wait. As soon as I felt I had the money, I said, I'm packing up my bags and I'm moving to Greenwich Village. And at that time, it wasn't even called a gayborhood. It was the village, period. If you said the village, everyone would say, straight people, oh, that's where the queers are, isn't it? And I would proudly say, yes, it's a wonderful place to be. Because
Now, queers was not the 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 way, it wasn't used the way it's being used today. It was a derogatory term.
I'm glad you said that, because years ago, if you were called queer, you'd be beat up in the streets of Brooklyn. Queer was a very negative thing. When I learned not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, through my affiliation and my membership in the Gay and Lesbian Synagogue of New York City, that the younger folk who are becoming members of our congregation, we're an older congregation now, we were formed in 1973, and the younger folk like the word queer and want to be known as queer. And I used to say to them, I'd have the shit beat out of me if I admitted way back in Brooklyn that I was queer. And they would look at me like, why? The meaning of that word changed. It was pejorative back in the 60s when people said, oh, Greenwich Village, that's where the queers are. Today, it's like, wow, not just accepted, but preferred, because it refers to all of us that were here in the 1960s, but didn't call ourselves that. We were still getting used to the idea of calling ourselves gay. That was a whole different approach. Because up to that point, we were either queer or homosexuals. The idea of saying gay was something entirely new to me, which I was delighted with when I first moved to Greenwich Village. Well, let's go out tonight with the gay boys. You bet, I'm with you. I'm going and we're going to the Stonewall.
Was it when you would leave for work and go to the city planning department, right?
Right.
Was it an oasis to go back home? Did you feel like you couldn't be yourself at work and
Right.
you were leaving almost two different lives?
So I graduated in 1967 and went to work immediately for the Department of City Planning. And I was very, very concerned that no one should find out that I'm gay, because I had a provisional title. I did not have civil service protection, and it was very, very worried that I might not receive promotions, that I would not be treated in the way that someone else would be if they were gay. So it was very much two lives at that time, leading a certain kind of life with my family, although they did know but didn't know what I was doing, and even friends at work at the Department of City Planning and colleagues, they all knew also, because after Stonewall, they said to me, gee, wow, it must have been exciting to have been there that night. They knew all along, but I was very sheltered, and I was living a kind of life in which no one knew. And I would wear a three-piece suit to work during the day and come home and change into jeans and a t-shirt or something and go to the Stonewall at night. The Stonewall was our club. And I tried to explain this to people, that it's not just that it was a bar. It's not just that it was a place for gay people to go to meet each other. It was a club. We looked forward to it after work, on weekends. And I lived only 2 blocks away. That's why I moved to 9th Street and took that apartment, because it was so close to the Stonewall. This is where we went to meet friends, to meet a date, and to have fun. It was our club.
And did you, when you first went to Greenwich Village, were you surprised or did you see and or were you surprised at the numbers of other people who were drawn to Greenwich Village and were coming from different areas of, I guess, New Jersey, Long Island, New York, Brooklyn, Queens,
And don't forget the Bronx.
the Bronx?
I was thrilled. I was thrilled to be meeting kids from other locations. I had met people at Hunter College because Hunter College is kind of the center of Manhattan, New York City. And I had always met people from other locations around the city. And I was so delighted that in Greenwich Village, when you spoke to people that you met in the street and you got to know, oh, so you come from Long Island and you live here. Oh, you're a Brooklyn boy. You're a Bronx boy. Greenwich Village was a magnet and a gathering place from anyone who desired a lifestyle a little bit freer than you would find in other parts of the city. Greenwich Village always had that reputation, and I always met people from all over New York, a lot of Long Islanders too, by the way, who were born and raised in Long Island and came to the city, and the location of their choice was Greenwich Village. Gay or straight, the lifestyle was something they liked.
I know we're looking forward to the next segment, which is learning from you what it was like in Stonewall that night in June. But before we get there, Elliot had a question of, do you attend CBST?
The answer is yes. I not only am a member of CBST, I'm a past president of the congregation. I've been a member since 1974. I've served in 2 positions as chair of the board of trustees, and as president of the congregation. And I'm now a past president, which gives me many, many honors during services. So the answer is yes. I'm still an active member of CBST, and I sure hope that we know each other from there.
And Elliot also wants to know, what is it like for you to see the membership change with trans Jews and others that may not have been there when you first started attending?
Good question. We started as the gay synagogue. A decade later, we became the gay and lesbian synagogue. A decade after that, we became the gay, lesbian, and bisexual synagogue. A decade after that, we became the LGBTQ plus synagogue. We have broadened not just our outreach and our welcome, but we have broadened our membership enormously. And then if you look at our masthead somewhere on our website, we say, and our family and friends. Everyone is welcome. To me, it's the biggest thrill in the world to see how the congregation has grown and how the congregation has taken into its fold everyone of every sexual identity. And right now, of course, we have the non-binary members who do not identify with a specific sex, a sexual identity. And that to me is absolutely breathtaking, that we are that far advanced that we take it for granted. People have the right to say who they are and what they are, and to declare openly how they feel about what they are. To say, I prefer to be called he, she, or they. This is what it's all about. This is what it was all about when I moved to Greenwich Village in 1967, and it's what the synagogue has been like since its formation.
All right, well, we're ready. Take us inside Stonewall on that famous night.
Okay, so 1969, 2 years after I had moved to Greenwich Village. 2 years after I specifically took an apartment on 9th Street so that I could be so close to the Stonewall. I had met someone there the week before, and we had agreed that we would meet again on Friday night. And it was a date, it was a prearranged date. And so we met and we were dancing on the dance floor. And I said, you know, it's time for us to have a drink because it's getting hot in here. And I have to keep telling people the atmosphere there was electric. It was hot. It was never cool enough. It always smelled from beer and liquor. And I was a cigarette smoker then, and the place reeked of cigarettes. It was the smell and cologne. Let's not forget cologne. Men and women and the trans, everyone used cologne. The place absolutely smelled from every smell in the world, including perspiration from all the dancing. So I walked over to the bar. The Stonewall at that time was 2 buildings. The original Stonewall, which then took over the garage next door to it. And of course, now it's back to the original Stonewall. In the garage that was next door to it was a large bar and a small dance floor behind it. So I went up to that bar and I ordered beers for the 2 of us. And suddenly the music stopped. The lights went on. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And I'm standing there with 2 beers in my hand, and someone yells out, "Raid." I'd never been in a raid before. I had no idea what would happen, and I was kind of terrified. And in the back of my mind was that thought once again, uh-oh, family, work, is this going to lead to something that I don't want to happen yet in my life? The date came up to me and said, we don't have to worry about anything. They're not looking for us. They're looking for the owners of the bar who haven't made their payoff to the police. And it was well known that the mafia owned most of these bars. They owned the Stonewall. And it was obvious to everyone they probably had not made their payoffs or a sufficient payoff to whomever one pays off. And the decision that night was, we're going to make the Stonewall suffer. So the boyfriend said to me, okay, let's just leave. And everyone who was in the bar slowly, in deafening silence, made our way out to the main entrance, because we had to go from the sidebar to the main bar and then out through the main door into the street, which is exactly the way the configuration is now. And again, we're in complete silence inside the Stonewall. As we walk out to the front, I suddenly see a bevy of lights focused in on us from all directions. It was as though every police car in the city had been called down to this Stonewall raid for impact and effect. The lights were so blinding, you really couldn't tell where they were coming from. And the only thing I could guess is that all the police cars were shaped in a U shape facing the entrance to catch everyone as we came out. So we left, no one disturbed us, we all walked out, and we went to the left, which is toward my home on 9th Street. We got about a block away to Waverly Place. And my boyfriend turned to me and said, why are we leaving? And I said, we have to get out of here, it's dangerous. And he said, the other kids aren't leaving, let's stay. We turned around, we went back, and we stayed all night. People really did not leave. No one wanted to leave. We were having a good time. It was still early in the evening on a Friday night. We had all gone out there to have a good time, and now suddenly we're being thrown out into the street. And it was the drag queens, and I always tell people who don't quite know this part of the story, it was the drag queens who started the rebellion, not just standing around in a manner threatening to the police, but forming a chorus line and dancing up and down the street. And the police would then try and break it up and stop them and say, okay, scatter. And they would move a few feet away and form a chorus line again and dance right into the police. And this went on all night long. There was even a point where the police started laughing because they were being entertained by the drag queens that were doing a chorus line in the street. And the other gay guys, we stood around hugging, kissing, holding hands. A night before that, we could never have done that on the street. It would have been impossible. And suddenly, that night, anything was possible. I like to call it a rebellion and not a riot. Some people call it a riot. I didn't see any damage done to property. I heard that ash cans were turned over. Someone even said that an ash can was thrown into a storefront, because I know on Saturday night, all the storefronts facing Sheridan Square were boarded up. People were afraid that there would be a riot that night. But I didn't see rioting. I saw rebellion. I saw people dancing in the street, and they were saying one thing loud and clear. If you won't let us dance inside, we're going to dance out here on the street, and we're going to keep doing it until you let us back in again, and until you accept us for who we are. Same thing happened Saturday night. We went back again. And of course, the Stonewall was closed. And there was a sign on the door. It closed indefinitely. It said boys. Okay, boys, closed indefinitely. There were lots of other places to go enjoy your weekend in Greenwich Village. We didn't. We stayed there. And the same thing happened again. The crowds gathered and people danced in the street. It wasn't quite the chorus lines from the night before, but people danced in the streets. And at that point, many other people in the city had heard about the rebellion the night before, and folk were coming down from other neighborhoods just to see the phenomenon of what had happened here in Greenwich Village. A friend of mine who lived at that time up in Chelsea Clinton said he came down only because he heard from a friend who heard from a friend that there was quite a ruckus out in the street, and he wanted to see it happen again on Saturday night, which it did. And I don't know how long we stayed, but people milled about all night long on Saturday. And again, the message was the same. We're coming back every night until you accept us for who we are. The most difficult night was Sunday. On Sunday night, the mayor sent in the tactical police, the riot police, and they showed up with white motorcycles and white helmets and white waistbands, and that was frightening because they came in from all directions, emerging on the Stonewall, and their main goal was to try to break up the crowd. And people were running in all directions. And at that point, I left. I didn't want to stay. I said, okay, for me, this is no longer the kind of experience. I've had it. I've been here. I did it. I participated in this rebellion, but this looks as though it could turn dangerous. Arrests were made that night by the tactical police force. It showed up in a lot of the newspapers the next day, and it even showed up on the news on television that night. I received phone calls from relatives who said, we know you go to places like that. We just want to make sure you're okay. And when I went to work on Monday, a lot of my coworkers said to me, what was it like to be there the night of the rebellion? So Stonewall really brought me out, whether I was ready to come out in 1969 at age 28, 27, whether I was ready to come out or not, Stonewall brought me out. And when I told this story on the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, when I addressed the members of my congregation for our Gay Pride Shabbat service, I said, this is what Stonewall did for me, this is what Stonewall did for you, and this is what Stonewall did for all of us. It brought us out, whether we were ready to or not. And it started the gay rights revolution, not just in this city, not just in this country, but around the world. And that was 1969.
Michael, did you feel when you went to people welcoming to you that you were now out, or was there distrust, uncomfortability, whatever word you could attach to it?
I felt totally comfortable, especially when my relatives would call and say, we want to make sure you're okay. And especially when my coworkers were excited and said, what was it like to be part of a raid? What was it like to be out there on the street? I felt it was the most comforting and warm things I could ever hear from friends. It was that point in my life that I was out to everyone. And I used to joke when they said to me, we knew all along, but we knew you didn't want to talk about it. I said, what was I wearing, a sign? They knew all along. They just wanted me to be ready to come out to them. And Stonewall was the time that did it. And I felt completely comfortable after that. I never felt uncomfortable again, ever, in letting anyone know that I am gay. And that was quite a turning point for a I'm trying to remember how old I was, 27, like 28, 29-year-old guy who had been living for so long in not denial, but not practicing sexuality when I was in Brooklyn all the time. To have my life turned around so quickly in just 2 years after Stonewall, and to have been part of one of the major shaping events of the last century, the Stonewall Rebellion. And it made me feel comfortable telling everyone, hey, I was at Stonewall. I was invited to speak, believe it or not, at a senior residence, an old age home in Upper Manhattan, to tell this story years ago, I think on the 40th anniversary of Stonewall. And several of the seniors raised their hand as I was talking, and they said, I was at Stonewall too. And of course, I said, oh yes, I remember dancing with you. The director of the senior program said to me, they probably were there at some time. It doesn't necessarily mean they were there the night that you were there. So many people were so pleased to come out and say, I was at Stonewall at some point in my life. I'm gay. Stonewall changed it for all of us. We were all comfortable with being out.
You knew it was historic, right?
Oh, I knew the second it was happening. The second I saw the tactical police force on Sunday night and saw it on television, as soon as I went home at the 11 o'clock news, and saw it in the newspapers. I know the New York Times had a piece, the Daily News had a piece. I knew I was part of history. Never intended to be part of history, but I was part of history.
And because we have a bunch of real estate people on the call, I guess it's fair to ask, did more people want to move into Greenwich Village? Did prices go up at that point, or did it become, I don't want to be there?
My feeling is that Stonewall had no impact at all on the real estate market. Greenwich Village was always a desirable location, and I was very lucky that I was able to obtain an affordable apartment when I came here in 1967. Prices were continually rising. Prices were always going up. Stonewall did not make Greenwich Village more attractive. Greenwich Village was always attractive. Prices have always gone up. Townhouses have always skyrocketed, except for one or two blips in the insurance industry. And I'm sure you can identify the years better than I can. Prices have always gone up. Apartments have always been great, great demand. And of course, so many of the buildings, including the one I'm in now, which I moved to in 1971, became cooperative buildings, and of course became more and more unaffordable. But I don't think Stonewall had anything to do with that. I think it was simply a matter of the fact that Greenwich Village was always such a desirable place to live for so many reasons. It's convenient. It's in the center of transportation. It has a diverse population. It welcomes gay and lesbian and all kinds of people. It welcomes people of all colors. It welcomes families with children. That's what's made it desirable. And Stonewall was just one part of that equation.
It's also important what you said before about your temple, that it was home. And sometimes, or too often, we think of home as the four walls and a roof with the amenities, but home means so many different things to different people. Do you believe that Greenwich Village almost set the stage for what future gayborhoods would be like?
The answer is definitely yes, because Greenwich Village showed that gay people can live alongside of those who are not gay and be accepted and be part of the community. And I can remember being a part of our community board here in Greenwich Village way back in the 1970s, which I'm a member of right now. And even in the 1970s, gay people sat next to straight people at community board meetings, and it didn't matter who or what you were. That translated itself to being comfortable in other neighborhoods. The first sign that I had of that was when I discovered that Chelsea was becoming the next quote unquote popular gay neighborhood, which is kind of then when I began to hear the expression gayborhood, because Greenwich Village was becoming far more expensive. I was lucky. The building I was in 1971, which was not the same one I had rented in 67. In 1971, I upgraded to a studio apartment, and now I've upgraded to one bedroom with my husband. But I was able to be in that building for $180 a month rent, $180 a month rent in 1971. And then the building went cooperative, and I was here, so I purchased the apartment. I had no choice. I wanted to stay. But things were becoming unaffordable for younger people who wanted to be in Greenwich Village, and they started moving into Chelsea, and that was okay. And some of my friends who wanted larger apartments moved to Chelsea, other parts of the city. Of course, Brooklyn is now a location where a lot of gay people.
So for those who aren't New Yorkers, how far would that be, Chelsea from?
Chelsea is walking distance, and that's why it was so desirable to people in Greenwich Village. I can remember sitting in some of the sidewalk cafes with my husband, and we would sit there and we would see people going up Greenwich Avenue, which is kind of a connecting street between Greenwich Village and Chelsea, and say, well, there go the gay boys up to Chelsea to dance tonight, or to go to a restaurant or whatever. And suddenly we began to realize that a lot of them were living there. It was about 10, 15, 20 blocks from Greenwich Village. When you start to look at the other neighborhoods of the city, like the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, they were also affordable, but they were never truly gayborhoods, because they were still mostly dominated by straight people, by families, and by people with more money. But I think Greenwich Village, Chelsea, and the area just north of Chelsea, Clinton, had in fact become the most popular gay neighborhoods because they remained affordable. But our problem in New York City, pre-pandemic, and who knows what will happen after the pandemic, is that once a location becomes this popular for anybody, it becomes increasingly not affordable. And I could never afford to purchase the apartment we live in now had I not purchased it in 1971, because the prices have really gone up. It's difficult now to be able to afford housing in Greenwich Village. And I don't know where, and the next set of gay neighborhoods that have been developing are across the East River in Brooklyn, in the areas that are close to Manhattan by subway, by car, by other means of transportation, because they're close to the city. And gay people always want to be close to the city. And these are the neighborhoods around Brooklyn, neighborhoods that at one time were never considered to be desirable for residential purposes, are becoming residences. And you know the joke. Well, the neighborhood's improving because the gay people are moving in. That was true. Once you saw gay people moving into a neighborhood, you felt, okay, this neighborhood is becoming more desirable, and someday it too
You
will.
saw that back then?
We saw that back then in the 70s, that people were moving into locations in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, in Atlantic Avenue. We saw the antique shops. First sign, the gay people are here, antique shops. Restaurants. That means that the neighborhood is going to become increasingly less affordable in the future, which is what happened. But that's, as a city planner, I can say that's what happens to all cities that are thriving. They grow and they change. Cities are dynamic. Populations change. People move around. People are always seeking desirable locations to live out their lifestyles. And the idea of a strict gayborhood like Greenwich Village is no longer necessary. I truly believe that most of Greenwich Village is not gay anymore. As I walk down the streets and I look in my own building, which in 1971 was full of gay and lesbian people, and you could always tell single people living alone, a gym teacher or a piano teacher, they were the gay folk. Most of them are gone now. Some of them passed away. Some retired to Florida. There are very few left in this building, and our building is becoming a very desirable location for families with children. The neighborhood is changing. That's the nature of New York City. I don't know if we will ever again see the gayborhood that Greenwich Village was way back in the 1960s when I came here, because it's no longer necessary. LGBTQ plus people are welcome in almost every neighborhood in New York City. That's the nature of New York City.
Your friends, when you were there, did you start to see that as you got older, they started to leave Greenwich Village? Where did they go? And
Well, that's
how
interesting.
did
It's
they
an
go to
interesting
live?
question. Yeah, an interesting question, because a lot of them sought partners and moved to larger quarters, which they couldn't afford in the village. And some of them moved to the Upper East Side to rather expensive apartments, some to Chelsea, as I mentioned, some to Connecticut. Believe it or not, there's a large gay population that own houses in Connecticut. And several of them, once it became partnered, would find affordable housing in New Jersey. And I have quite a few friends out there in New Jersey who have been living together as couples for a long time because housing is far more affordable there. Some in Long Island, but mostly scattered all over the metropolitan area. There's no one place that former Greenwich Village gay and lesbian population moved to. They've scattered all over the city, all over the metropolitan area, I should say, because it's okay to be gay anywhere in this metropolitan area.
Those friends who moved to a more suburban environment, did they obviously didn't have the numbers of people around them to protect them. Did they talk about discrimination back?
No, never. I don't ever remember anyone saying they were discriminated against because they were gay. Not to the best of my knowledge. Again, you kind of move to a neighborhood where, oh, well, gee, we have friends who own a house here in this community in New Jersey, so we're going to move there as well. Some of them even moved up to upstate New York. Rhinebeck has a very large gay community. One family gay people know about it, others move up there, and Rhinebeck has a lot of gay couples who bought housing up there. Number one, it was affordable, and number two, they knew that it was acceptable. Those are the two main things. I don't think any of us ever experienced any kind of discrimination anywhere in the New York metropolitan area. The city has changed so much since Stonewall.
Now, what about, you talk about your age, you talk about living in Greenwich Village for so long. What concerns you about housing for the aging LGBTQ population today?
That's a major issue because again, we're lucky. We have a cooperative apartment. My husband and I are both retired right now, and we can afford to live in our cooperative apartment. But there are many gay and lesbian people who aged in place, who are in rental apartments, and the rents are going up. And again, we don't know what's going to happen after the pandemic, but when rents start to go back up again, there will be single gay and lesbian folk who will not be able to afford living where they're living right now. Some of them live in rent-protected apartments, in rent-stabilized apartments, but not everyone can afford it, even when the rent stabilization allows a minimal increase in rent for each renewal of a lease. And my feeling is that a lot of them will have to seek other locations because they will not be able to afford to be living alone in a place like Greenwich Village where the costs are so high. When you're living on a retirement pension, when you're living on less income than you had when you were working, you have to be a little bit more cautious about everything. And housing is probably the first item that will take a piece of your budget, and you might have to roommate with someone else. You might have to leave Manhattan and go to another location in the city that is less expensive. Some of them even end up in assisted living because assisted living can in some ways be more affordable than trying to remain alone in the heart of the city. It's going to become a problem as the gay and lesbian population continues to age. We've lost a lot. We lost a lot of men to the AIDS crisis, and there are a lot of men who will not be aging in place because they're simply gone, but there will be an increasing population of gay and lesbian seniors. And right now there are lots of services available for gay and lesbian seniors, but housing is going to be a major issue. At one time, in the gay synagogue, we were talking about trying to figure out how we could get a senior residence for gay people built in the city, something that's convenient, that would be near the theater and all the restaurants. And when we started to investigate it, we said, you know something, this is more expensive than standard housing to try and provide something for such a segmented slice of the population. My feeling is that for those gays and lesbians who are aging in place, it will become increasingly less affordable for them as we recover from the pandemic and as prices start to rise again. It's a major problem that will be facing the population unless they own their own homes. Home ownership has become a major way of protecting what we have in terms of our housing so that we can age in place. And I'm so glad that I have that with my husband, that we have our own home here in Greenwich Village. We've also built a home in the Philippines, which is his home country. So we do have our own homes, but there are a lot of gays and lesbians who don't, and that will be a problem.
As you look back at your youth and your childhood and your early adulthood in Greenwich Village, what just blows your mind about what is occurring today with whether it be discrimination or acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community?
To me, it blows my mind that it is so accepted. It blows my mind that we've gotten so much legislation through the city of New York and the state of New York and even the federal government. And what was blowing my mind was in the prior federal administration, I was so afraid that all the rights that we fought so hard for would slowly disappear, which to me is such a relief that it's not happening and that we're back to a level of normalcy. But this is such a different world than the world I saw in the 1960s, where we had no rights at all. And today, we have almost every right that we feel we're entitled to, every right that every other segment of the population has. It's truly mind-blowing to think about the difference that's occurred in 50 years in the city, in the state, in the country, and even in some places around the world. There are places in the world where it's still the way it was for us in the 1960s. We're still illegal to be gay, where you can be imprisoned for being gay. Not in the world that we live in here. The changes have been unbelievable. And I'm so pleased that I was part of that I was part of that rebellion and lived long enough to see legislation adopted by the city, the state, and the federal government to protect everyone's rights. And if anything ever happens to take those rights away, I'll be the first one out on the line to fight against that.
Did you see marriage equality change the game too?
Marriage equality definitely changed the game. It was a milestone in the fight. It was a milestone in the fight of the day that it became legal for gay people to be married here in New York State. I took Ray down to the New York City, the New York State License Bureau, and we applied for a license. And he kept saying to me, "Why are we doing this?" And I said, "Because we can." And that's something we could never do before. And I was so afraid we were going to lose that marriage equality would be out the window, but it's not. We still have it. And we're married. And why are we married? Because we can be.
Somebody wrote here, thank you for being such a critical turning point of our history. And because you did live this history and you are a walking encyclopedia of knowledge, what can we learn from everything that you've gone through and keep it going today?
The only thing I can say that we can learn from it is that never give up hope. Never give up your desire. Had I stayed in Brooklyn, had I not gone to the Stonewall, had I left and run away the night of the rebellion, had I not become a member of the gay synagogue, had I not become a member of so many other organizations, I never could have seen the kind of change I'm seeing. Don't ever give up hope. Participate in every effort that you see for equal rights for everyone. And again, not just gay people. Equal rights for everyone is the issue that we are always fighting for. That's the lesson. Continue the fight. No matter how old you are, no matter what you are doing right now, whether you're working, whether you're retired, continue the fight. Never give up. You never know what will be around the corner.
Would you be okay if people wanted to reach out directly to you by email?
Not at all. I have no problem at all. You can give my email address to others if they would like.
Okay. Well, you want to give it to us now?
Yeah, it's mlevine1, MLEVINE, the number 1 at nyc.rr.com.
Okay, so this has been even better than I thought it would be. It has been just a fast-moving hour of time that has filled us with so much historical perspective of understanding of what has occurred in the community and the movement. And hopefully the Equality Act will be that last step forward to bring about no more discrimination. And I know you want that as well. So with that, our first look at the journey to home ownership. It started in Greenwich Village. It'll keep going. Our next place will be taking a look at Castro in the late 1990s into the 2000s. So with that, Michael, Ryan, thank you so much. We appreciate everybody listening in.
And thank you very much for inviting me to be your first speaker tonight.